Good afternoon, Kimberly. Can you briefly introduce yourself and a little bit about your work?
Hi, Ben. Thanks for having me. Yes, so I'm Kim Nicholas. I'm a senior lecturer at Lund University Center for Sustainability Studies. And I focus on my research and teaching on how to have a good life on planet Earth and a living planet.
Well, that sounds very important. And what's the message that you have? What's the message that you're spreading with all the studies that you're doing? I'm sure that you could bring it down to a soundbite of the message that you're spreading.
Well, basically, what the science tells us is the future of a good life on planet Earth depends on reducing climate pollution to near zero in our lifetimes. So, this is a big challenge and also a big opportunity, and one that I'm excited to talk about with the Øredev audience.
Yeah, because you're going to take us on a retrospective to 2050, and again, without spoilers of your talk, why is it important that we look so far ahead of time?
Well, 2050 actually isn't that far away from a climate perspective. If all goes well, I'll be 78 in 2050, so I hope to still be here to see it. And certainly most people born today will be alive then, and many of the conference attendees as well. So I guess it's a chance to take a little bit of a longer term perspective than we often do, but one that's really important and from a climate perspective, absolutely critical. Basically, the choices that we make today in 2017 and the very next few years determine the climate future that we will experience the rest of our lives on planet Earth and many, many, many generations to come. So it's really a critical time. And 2050 is close enough that we can understand and imagine it, and far enough that we'll see a really big difference of the choices that we're making now.
And I get from that it brings like an urgency to our decisions now. It's not one of these things that we can kind of put off for the next generation or for the next whatever. It's like we need to be making these decisions and brave decisions right now.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think I'm glad to hear you say that. I think many people are realizing that Sweden and Scandinavia have certainly been leaders in that regard. In February, Sweden signed the climate law, which commits to a net zero society, meaning Sweden's planning on reducing greenhouse gas pollution to basically zero and potentially taking carbon out of the atmosphere as well if that's necessary, but really focused on reducing the source of the pollution so that we have a safe climate. Unfortunately, we're at a point now where we've used up almost all of the safe operating space of the atmosphere. So we have very little margin left to continue business as usual. And there's some big changes ahead and also some big opportunities.
And so, as you know, our audience are software developers. So I'm just wondering if you could put that into a metaphor of, a computer or something like that, so we can understand where we are in terms of this huge problem that we have. Could you play with me a little bit with that?
Yeah, sure. Well, my partner is also a software developer, so maybe I need to chat with him a little more about the right metaphor exactly. But I think technology certainly plays a huge role in climate, and I think that's something that's very relevant for this audience, that innovation and technology are absolutely critical. But I think one thing that's also important to understand is that they aren't sufficient, that it won't be just a technological breakthrough that solves the climate problem. It's also changes in politics and society, really in hearts and minds, and how we think about the climate and understand our personal impact on the climate that makes a big difference. I don't know if I've succeeded in a software metaphor, but I'll try to work on that one for the talk.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that maybe it's like we've basically used up all our free memory or something like that. We're kind of at that point where things are starting to malfunction because there isn't enough space for our programs to be, working effectively.
Thank you. You did it much better than I did. Yeah, I think that does make sense. And you see that the system doesn't work as it should when that's the case. And if we're talking about a computer system, maybe it's slowing down the operating speed or having other problems. If we're talking about the climate system, it's can we grow food and have clean water to drink and clean air to breathe? Is there space for nature and the ecosystems that we've grown up with to live? So these are really big questions.
And is it a case of getting a new computer, or is it like do we need to work with the kind of the computer that we have and add on stuff or change things or?
Well, I know there's another speaker at the conference who'll be talking about colonizing Mars, which I think is really exciting and pushing the frontiers of exploration and science. I don't see that as a viable strategy for the continuation of the human race. I mean, certainly taking care of the one place in the universe that we know can sustain life, which is planet Earth, is a top priority. So I think it's really about looking at what the system abilities are and how we can help work in line with those abilities. So one of the projects that I work on is called ecosystem services or nature-based solutions. So that's looking at how nature solves problems and, for example, recycling wastes and having closed systems that are regenerative, and trying to get some inspiration from that in how we, for example, plan our food systems to be more sustainable.
I love that. So using the kind of the knowledge of nature to kind of, to see new solutions that we're not seeing right now.
Yeah, nature has had billions of years of evolution to solve a lot of problems, which often it's done very elegantly, and we have a lot to learn there, and a lot of innovations that are happening now or have been going on for a long time. In some cases, these are traditional practices. In other cases, they're innovative that offer a lot of potential.
And again, like we know that kind of exponential technology is on its route now, right? It's happening, and so it's about how do we harness that? How do we harness that to start unlocking progress to these really important problems?
There's certainly a big role for technology. I mean, one major area is in clean energy. So something like 3/4 of climate pollution now comes from energy generation, whether it's for transport or for heating or electricity. And there are many technical solutions to that, some of which are underway, some of which need more investment and more innovation to come to market. There's also a really important role to play, not just on the supply side and getting clean energy and divesting and moving away from dirty energy, but also for more thoughtfully using energy and for reducing demand for energy and thinking about, for example, how we travel and making those choices in a smarter way, having more opportunities to use teleconferencing like we are today, and reduce unnecessary travel so we can focus on what really matters.
And so if I'm a software developer in the audience, and you talk about contribution and it's bringing it down to that personal level, what impact would you hope that your talk has on me as the kind of individual software developer?
Well, I think the software developer audience is really important because this is a very smart and creative group of people who touch so many people's lives. I mean, you're inside people's phones, in their pockets, in their homes. The products I think that the conference attendees make are, really widely used. So I see a big potential there, for example, in the design of thinking about how to incorporate more climate-friendly accounting or nudges. So, for example, are there ways, if you're working on a social media platform, are there ways to tell people what the carbon impact of their choices are, not just in terms of likes, but, kind of making that choice more obvious? Are there ways to make reducing climate pollution into a game that tells people what they can do that really makes a difference in a fun way? I mean, I think your audience is much better at coming up with these solutions than I am, but there's a lot within those products I think people can innovate. And then within companies and as individuals, there's also a lot that people can do. And I think some of the big places to look are, as I mentioned, travel. So flight, for most people, flying on an airplane is by far the biggest contribution that we make to climate pollution. So I've cut my flying by 80% and looking for ways to do more. That makes a really big difference. So that's something to look at personally in planning vacations, to thinking about local, staycations rather than faraway trips, or ways of traveling more effectively, both personally and for work. Being able to live carb-free makes a really big difference, and also our diets. So eating a plant-based diet, and that can be both personally, and also I know my partner's firm has made an effort at their canteen to reduce meat, both for health and environmental reasons, I think. And so it's something people are getting more aware of.
And what I get from that is it's like having that as a lens. So when you're making decisions, have it as a lens of how is this kind of good for us now, but also, as you say, for the future.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, something I've been thinking about is one way of measuring a good life for me is thinking about maximizing meaning and minimizing carbon or climate pollution. And taken in those terms, I think on a daily basis, we're thinking about maximizing meaning given limited resources of time and money. And those are very familiar, units that we have. But carbon is also a really limited and precious resource, and it's one we don't have much left of that we need to spend really wisely and find ways to focus on what really counts. So I think taking that kind of perspective can be helpful in focusing decisions.
Say that again, maximizing meaning and minimizing carbon.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's very good. So it's easy to to digest, to have that kind of, because I think, again, as you're saying, like, and the theme of the conference is about, it's the next gen, that, every company is a software development company, it's everywhere. And so, like, when we're building products, not only just to have about, the usability of it, profit, all these things, but actually to have that lens of, how is this impacting the world, or what can we do to bring forward, better care of the world in terms of climate change? To have that integrated as a very key, decision maker.
That would be great, and I think people at Øredev are well positioned to do that. So I hope some of them take up the charge.
And how can we kind of like, because again, it's like that urgency, right? It's like people know it, I believe anyway, but it's like, how do we spark that? How do we get it that actually, what, things need to change, because otherwise we are, and our children are pretty screwed.
Well, I think making the point that excuse me, sorry, 1 second. Excuse me. I think you've touched on something really important there, which is helping people to realize that the people and the places that everyone cares about are at risk from climate change. And this isn't some far off, phenomenon that is affecting only people far away that we'll never meet, or polar bears that we feel sorry for, but that, don't live in our backyards. This is something we can really see and feel and touch. And for me, this has been very personal in the last week. My family's been evacuated from the wildfires in California, and those are the most destructive fires in state history. They've already killed almost 3 times as many people as died in all of last year in the U.S. in wildfires. Tragedy. We have many friends who've lost homes. I'm very fortunate that my family is safe, and it appears their homes are safe as well. But so many people have not been in the same position. And these are fires that have been made worse by climate change. So we are limiting our options and making the places that we live in more dangerous and less beautiful and less available, not just for distant future generations, but really today. This is effects we see now. When we think about children and future generations, that's also really urgent. And I think I've heard from a lot of young people. I mean, I teach at the university and gave a talk last week to high school students. It's an issue that they really care about and sort of struggle to grapple with, of how have they been put in this position where their choices are really limited, and they're facing these really difficult, a much more limited world because of the choices that previous generations have made. So I think there's really a moral imperative to step forward, and for people who are in a position to do so, to take the leadership role.
And there's something coming up, like, so being in Sweden or in Scandinavia, so we're going carbon neutral, these ideas, like, how do we bring, these concerns, as you say, closer to home? Because in some ways we're sitting here in Scandinavia, and there's not so many of these issues here, and we're being, moving towards these. But if you look at the States, or you look at India or China, they're not being carbon neutral. So part of me says, kind of, what's the point? Because we can only have like a small impact. How can we use that, or use this as a real bright spot to kind of spread the message to the rest of the world?
I think there are many opportunities to do that. And I mean, I come originally from the States. I've lived here now for 7 years. So I've spent a lot of time in both places. And I do see that Scandinavia is held up as a model around the world. And I think what we do here even as a small country and a relatively small emitter in the global scale, really matters. People talk about Sweden as the moral compass of the international climate negotiations, for example. So that plays a really important role, and having demonstrated on the ground things that work here shows others that it's possible, and that's really been important in pushing the rest of the world. So it does make a big impact. It's not only at this international sort of policy level, but it's also what cities can do, how communities choose to be lower carbon, schools, much smaller projects that do scale up and do have a big impact. So I think people starting where they are and can make a direct impact really makes a big difference. In terms of the global question, I know the headlines, excuse me. In terms of the global question, I know the headlines sometimes are very discouraging coming out of the U.S. Certainly the federal government in the U.S. is not on the side of the science of climate change, and that's really distressing. But one thing that I am really encouraged by is so many have stepped forward. In the absence of federal leadership, U.S. states and cities have more than filled the gap, and there is so much energy from the bottom up, from the grassroots, from individuals and communities who say, you know what, I can't wait, the climate won't wait, and my kids won't wait, and my community won't wait for another presidential election. We're going to have to start doing this work ourselves. And that's really happening on the ground now and making a big difference.
And I love what you're saying, building kind of putting that all together, is that seeing that Scandinavia is this beacon of hope and this place of really showing that it can be done, so that even if we see it on a like a political level that it's not happening, it is actually happening from the kind of bottom up, as you're saying, and that, you know, the states of America aren't always reflecting what is going on in central government, and the same across the world.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned China also, and I think China is now the largest emitter of greenhouse gases for about the last 10 years, although historically still most of the climate pollution in the atmosphere does come from the U.S. But China is taking a lot of steps now. We may have heard they've just banned the internal combustion engine, and that's forcing car manufacturers to rethink their strategy and to basically change their technology to see that this is a change that's coming, that can't be avoided. They are really heavily investing in renewable energy. They're working on reducing meat consumption. So China, I think, is taking the climate issue really seriously and showing leadership there.
And where's that coming from? Because, as you say, that's what politics can actually do by banning something that changes things completely, right? Is that you put in these legislations and then you have to find a new solution. So what do you see, or do you see what's driving the Chinese government or whatever to make these changes?
Well, China is obviously in a different position. I mean, they're not a democracy, and so they sometimes have, can make decisions more quickly. There are many problems with that system as well, obviously, in terms of freedom of speech and human rights. But in terms of moving quickly in the direction that the government decides to go, that can happen quickly there. And in some cases, that's been positive, like with this renewable energy investment. I think in democracies, things tend to move more slowly because there's more social discussion and debate, which I think is very appropriate and important. But that also points to the importance of getting citizens involved, because often politicians need to feel that their constituents who vote for them will support a bold move and, aren't just... I've heard that again and again, actually, that, politicians need to know that their constituents really support them in investing in clean energy, for example, or in doing something like making a ban on a polluting technology, because, of course, there'll be some pushback from industry, and there needs to be strong support from society. If that's, in fact, the right direction to go, then, there needs to be a coalition there to support that.
But already in what you're saying, and saying it so eloquently, actually, is it gives me hope that, because you can often feel that, we're in the kind of, we've pulled a ticket, and this is going to be tough to turn around. But what I can hear from you, there are lots of these, there is a lot of bright spots that we can really focus on and bring forth to change things.
Absolutely. I fully believe that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I have my down days as well. It's not always easy working on climate change, but there is so much hope and so much energy. And I really think that the world is ready for this. And I see so many encouraging signs that people are up for the challenge and need to know where to focus their energies, where they can make a real contribution, because I think there's a lot of willingness to do that.
And again, what I'm hearing from that, from a business kind of sense, is understanding these things, because if you understand that, not only can you, do something great for the planet, but you could also do something great for your business by actually understanding where these changes are going to be and getting yourselves ready for that.
Absolutely. I think there's enormous business opportunities in being proactive on being climate smart. And we've seen that already, that there are many businesses who are leading on this, who've already started. And of course, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. I think it's the same with being climate smart, that many people are realizing, okay, we need to think about our investments, and fossil fuels are not a good investment for the future, because the atmosphere cannot afford to have more of them and leave us with a safe climate. So that's something individual investors and institutional investors are taking really seriously now. There's a big divestment campaign that's gained an enormous amount of momentum in the last 2 or 3 years even. That's something businesses are also looking at in terms of how they align their finances and the kind of offerings that they give their customers, the kind of information they give, and the way that they design their business strategies. I think to be profitable, they really have to take climate into account and kind of be on the right side of history in helping to make this zero carbon society happen.
Yeah, and what you've done again so well for me there is you've spoken to the rational part of it, because I get the emotional piece, but the rational part that actually business-wise, or say business-wise, it doesn't make sense not to look here, because as you say, this change, there is going to be a flip soon. We don't know when it is, but we need to be ready for it, because otherwise you're not going to be in the game anymore.
Yeah, I really think that. And I think there are many businesses who are way ahead on this and who can lead by example, and who are, publicizing their strategies and making that known and leading the way. And there are others who are just getting started. But I think, in my experience, getting started is the hardest part, sort of figuring out where to go and getting the motivation to do it. I think once, so many businesses, one kind of helpful rule of thumb is, I mentioned this 90% reduction in climate pollution that's needed by 2050. So that means cutting climate pollution in half over the next decade. So that's a goal that we as individuals can take on, that businesses can be considering. That's sort of the scale of what we're trying to do. And that, I think, helps focus, it's not only, to put the analogy in the individual domain, it's not only changing a light bulb or taking a canvas bag to the store. Those are good things to do, but they really pale in comparison with the bigger high impact actions where you can really focus your energy, like eating a plant-based diet, avoiding flights, living car-free, planning smaller families. That's a really big one as well. So those are the big places to focus. And for individuals, for businesses, it's also thinking about, okay, for most businesses, their travel and for their employees and heating and cooling their buildings, potentially their investments, are the biggest areas to focus on. And looking at, okay, how can we cut carbon by half? That's a good place to start.
Wow. I am so excited for your talk. This is
thank you so much.
I've got fire in my belly already. It's like, okay, what's the action I can take today? Because what I know as a coach and a facilitator, when you're working in transformation, it's you need to face the future, but then it's about bringing it down to what is the action that I can take today, and know that it's just about demystifying that. Yes, it's going to be challenging, but actually it's just a systemic approach. We just need to take one step at a time, and we will get there.
That's great. I think, if you're wondering yourself, what could you do next? For me, it would be thinking about both your choices as an individual and as a larger community. And as an individual, as I mentioned, it's, what we eat, how we travel, and planning our families. And that's different for everyone. What's relevant for you at this time? And focusing energy on ways to make sustainable choices in those domains that, maximize meaning for you and minimize carbon. As part of a larger community, then it's a question of, okay, is it in your neighborhood that you see a need? If it's not safe to bike, for example, why not? And how could you help improve that? Is it about the restaurants and places that you eat that you don't have good plant-based options? And how could you help change that? Is it something political at a local or a larger scale? Is it a campaign that you support and want to get involved with? So I think, both in the private sphere of our lives and in the public sphere, we all have a lot that we could do.
And again, when we bring it to kind of the personal level, like, we can do something about that, as opposed to, if we look too big a picture, it's just too stressful, right? It's just too big a problem to get your head around. But if you can actually bring it into what impact can I have, as you say, on myself, on my family, on my community, and work from there. My sense is, with people like yourself who hold in the bigger picture, that we will actually make it.
I think so. That's what I'm aiming to imagine in this talk, coming back, the retrospective from 2050, sort of what's a pathway that could get us there. And by discussing and trying to imagine that pathway, hopefully open some doors to help make it a little closer to reality as well.
And I was going to ask you to put it into a soundbite, but you've just done it there
okay.
for me. So if you could put then what the impact that you want to have, if you could put that into one or two sentences, the impact that you want to have on the audience, what would that be?
I would love to inspire people to cut their climate pollution in half. I think that's a really good place to start, both personally and in their professional lives or in their public lives. So figuring out, I guess that includes both convincing people that this is important and worth their time, and also, I hope, giving people some inspiration and hope that it is possible and it is meaningful and it is really worthwhile, and then some practical tools on where to focus and where to start.
Again, I can't wait for it, because I think that's the thing. It's that two level, the understanding and then the actual practical tools, and knowing that kind of everybody around is also on the same pathway, that we're moving towards the same vision. Because often I find in the world that the vision is so it's all over the place. We don't seem to have a consolidated vision, so it's very difficult to know where we're walking to together.
That's true, and I think it's really valuable to share visions and to listen to others and understand what their priorities are. And I think part of what makes life beautiful and worth living is that people do have different visions, and that these should be respected. But it is quite amazing and wonderful to me that the world collectively has decided to share a vision of avoiding dangerous climate change. That's what the Paris Climate Agreement says, and limiting warming dramatically to try and basically stabilize the climate within our lifetimes is a shared vision that basically every country on Earth, with the exception now of the US, but as I said, the cities and states are stepping forward to meet those terms anyway. So it is a almost universally shared vision. And that's something that I think plays out differently in different communities, and there are different pathways and priorities to achieve it. But I think everybody has a part in creating that vision and making that happen. And I hope to live to see it. I think it will happen.
And on that note, our time is up. I would just want to thank you so much for your time today, and to say that we really look forward to hearing you in Malmö.
Thank you, Ben. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for your time.
Yeah.
See you in a few weeks.
See you in a few weeks.